Yeah.
I, as you were speaking there, Keith, my brain was ticking over on potential conversation points, and I'd certainly be more than happy to just launch into that. I can set it up and frame it at the very outset, because I think we can bring in large language models. We can have a touch on AGI. We can have a touch on the concept of quantum computing and the implications of quantum computing for AI, and then project all of that 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years, and is our evolved brain ready for all of that?
Yes. Hello, dear viewers. You are already watching us live, preparing the conversation. So this is the soft starting of the episode of today, 58th episode of Talk to Orbiting Doctors. As usual, with me, my dear co-host, Martin Duffy.
Evening all. Hello.
And as we announced in episode 57, we are going to repeat our guest. This is not usual, but it's happening quite a few times last year. This year is the first time happening, and I'm so pleased to have again with me Keith Jones and Mila. It's great to have you here. Thank you for joining and taking your time to be here with us for this continuing of the conversation. Martin, I don't want to ruin your plans, but we have a tradition on our episodes.
We do indeed, yeah. And both of you shared very, very valuable insights, personal insights from your previous musings to us, guys. We asked both of you at the very outset of all of our conversations if there was anything about yourself, your past, your background, your family that isn't generally well known, but that you would be happy to share with us. And both of you gave us examples of, Mila, you specifically brought us into your cultural heritage, which was fascinating in its breadth. And Keith, you gave us insight into your family musical traditions, which again equally segued us beautifully into some of our conversations. I wonder, do you have any other personal nuggets that each of you would be happy to share from your past or present, or maybe even from your future aspirations?
Okay. I certainly have one. Mila, yourself?
I'll think of something in a second.
All right.
Keep doing that.
So that certainly the one for me is infinitely personal, and it is the birth of our 5th grandchild. I find this whole positioning in terms of family constellations, and particularly from a Kleinian perspective that looks at the sequencing of where people are in the family according to their birth. So I find it fascinating, just both being a grandparent and observing the changing dynamics within the family, and particularly within the grandchildren grouping, according to where they have been born and the sequence of that. And it's fascinating, if you know, whether you subscribe to Klein or not. It's an interesting position to look on. So I think that for me, it's where am I? Changing perspectives. Yeah. Changing perspectives in the family constellation is where I am.
I would add then to that, but from a different perspective. I am looking these days into ancestors and the family constellations that came before me that I'm not familiar with. I knew some names from the past, but discovering more names, discovering the stories of people that I came after, that they didn't know that I will exist, or who am I, and I don't know who are they, and getting familiar with them is also very changing perspective experience.
And you know, as I reflect on what both of you have just said there, I read something relatively recently about our DNA and the extent to which our DNA has pre-programmed us as individuals, but it's directly extracted from those ancestors.
Oh yeah.
And the fact that we are replicants of a past, but we are not bound to replicate the past.
Yeah.
We're products of the past, but we're not bound to replicate the past. And that's, again, Keith, I 100% empathize with the grandchildren. I'm on number 4, just born 6 months ago, and we were really fortunate because they live close by, so we get to see them very, very often, very regularly. We get to see them interact with each other, and again, your point is so well made, that the context in which they meet, to see them evolving over time. And then when you think back, now, Mila, picking your point, looking at the ancestral side, even looking at my own family, my own cousins that I would have had a very close relationship with. And when I see those relationships being replicated, but may not necessarily be exactly the same. So it's fascinating to look backwards and then to project forwards. There's maybe if we combine both of those, I mean, part of the reason that we're having this conversation with both of you again is because individually we had 2 really interesting conversations with you. Artificial intelligence was kind of central to all of those conversations that we had in one way or another. And then we had a joint conversation with you on our last podcast. And again, a point came up towards the end of that we said, oh, that could be interesting for another day. And it was around this idea of artificial general intelligence as opposed to large language models and the use of artificial intelligence. But just before we came on live, or perhaps, Paul, you caught us live, we were just, Keith, you raised the point about dialogue. And certainly part of my own studies in the past, academic studies, took me down that path in a little bit of detail to understand the concept of dialogue, as opposed to, as a distinction from conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe that idea of dialogue in an organizational setting, in a meetings setting, and how people engage with and interact with each other. And if we reflect back to our last conversation where we talked about AI, large language models, how they can be brought into meetings, how they can disrupt actually the interpersonal. In some ways, they can almost become either barriers between interpersonal, or potentially become positive connections between interpersonal. So maybe an angle for this conversation could be the impact on dialogue. Artificial intelligence and our society kind of developments recently, and their impact on our abilities to dialogue, to engage with each other individually and or collectively in the organizational setting. Is that a topic or a theme that will be worthy of 45 minutes or 40 minutes of our discussion, and see where it might take us?
It certainly is for me, because it's incredibly foreground in where I am in the writing of my current book, and it's particularly relevant because it takes me back to many years ago when I was working on a project for the Society of Exploration of Psychoanalytic Theory into Organizations at the Tavistock Clinic in London. And it was with Bill Isaacs and Peter Garrett, before he wrote his book on dialogue. Do you remember The Art of Organisational Conversation? Well, I was involved in some of that early work, and it gave me a really strong felt sense of the difference between what dialogue is and what organizational conversation is. And they are very, very different.
Totally different.
Wow. This is
Totally
awesome. This is awesome here. And Mila, sorry to cut your turn here, because I'm excited, and I hope that our viewers are also excited. So we are going to explore dialogue versus conversation. And that's a fascinating distinction for me. I want to learn from you. Over to you, Mila.
I agree, Paul, with you fully, and I would give back to Keith to tell us how in your book you are going to present the difference, or what are the characteristics of each.
Well, the way it's actually showing up for me, and this is the interface with AI, because I have consulted with different AI platforms in terms of the use of dialogic questions as having specific parameters. And the specific parameters, just kind of to be clear, is that whatever part of the conversation is present, the question that emerges from that serves a purpose of elevating the conversation to a meta perspective. So, so forgive me for being somewhat obtuse. It's a kind of a conversation about a conversation that takes differing layers and leads you to a place as yet unknown. So the way that is working out for me at the moment is actually on using dialogue reflection into the role of the facilitator, the internal world of the facilitator, which is the focus of my second book. So that is both from the exploration of either transdisciplinarity, or to a large extent from a very Heideggerian perspective of the nature of being, from the very early sources of that work in Gadamer, but also now taking it up a layer. So what are the questions that we have about the questions? That we are beginning to evolve different ways of response and different ways of thinking. And I think that one of the things about dialogue that I find so fascinating, what it requires, in my view, is a non-attachment to the outcome. That is honestly, that is so huge in the difference between conversational style and dialogic style. So if I hold a position, if we hold a position about AI or AGI and its role in organizations from a position of rightness, then we are likely not to enter dialogue. But if we just see the answer as data which creates another context from which another question or another subject emerges, then we begin to create something that is as yet unknown. And it's this elevation, these meta perspectives of conversations that make it so rich. I was went on a bit there, but that was my response, Mila, to your question.
I was listening to the silence here. I was listening to the silence after your comments, Keith. They are deep.
Exactly. So it takes time to process, because I never thought of difference between dialogue and the conversation. And
huge.
Non-attachment to the outcome. I find that fascinating, and it takes time to process that thought.
It does, and I think in that way it's more akin to the non-attachment to the rightness of the position.
Totally, yeah.
That's what it is. Our held unconscious rightness to what we believe or don't believe to be right and true about anything.
So if you were to, maybe a slightly different way to characterize it, but it's the same basic meaning, that it's if you approach an engagement in a pure dialogic form, one, you have no commitment to the outcome, as you said, Keith.
Yeah.
Two, you have no adherence to the rightness or wrongness of your own view as you start the dialogue. But three, the purpose of the dialogue is not to reach a conclusion. The purpose of the dialogue is to reach shared understanding of perspectives.
Absolutely.
And it's no stronger than that. So when the dialogue finishes, something else might happen. Conversation, analysis, decision making, some other process may then take place. But if we approach dialogue as it's technically defined, it has a totally exploratory sense to it, rather than we're trying to get to someplace.
You're absolutely right, Martin. And I'm going to come back to a point that Paul raised when we began this conversation, and that was the space between. Because, you know, looking at this through a psychologist lens, we begin to enter the as much not as well researched, but I find fascinating, the world of quantum psychology. And quantum psychology is a completely different format of thinking, showing the value that is inherent within the unspoken space. So, you know, when we begin to look at these areas of space that are created, so Martin, to take your point, if we were having a dialogic conversation about the nature of this meeting, the meeting with the doctors, whatever it may be, the value of that would come in the space that is left. The space that is left by not having an attachment to reaching a conclusion. I might share a view with you, I might not share a view with you, and both are equally valid. So it becomes intriguing when we begin to look at the process of dialogue and the value of the empty space.
Mm-hmm.
Mila, your thoughts?
Oh.
My thoughts are going in a different direction. This is very inspiring conversation, I have to say, so far. And my thoughts are going in the direction of including back to AI that is always somehow mixed in our conversation. Because I find the definition that Kitty just presented is fascinating, and I love if the future would be like that we would have more dialogue, and that we exploit or use the space, the silence, use the void of thinking or shared understanding, and leaving it there without the conclusion, without that attachment. I love that concept. And I'm thinking in the world that will be full with AI and people having conversation and thinking that they might have a friend in AI. How are those two perspectives going to impact us? Are we going to have more of this dialogue conversation, or we're going to have it less because people are so used to AI validating their thoughts and people might get a false impression that that's how a dialogue looks like.
Well, let me ask you a question, Mila. You may have thought about this, you may not, but I'd just be interested in your immediate response. How would you define your relationship with AI?
For me, this is a tool. I'm clear on that. It's a tool that does things, and a lot of things can do for me. I'm still the brain behind.
Okay. Do you mind if I just ask you a couple more questions about it? What is the belief system that you hold that supports your view of seeing AI as a tool?
My belief system behind is that it's very biased. The development of the technology is biased and limited. And I come from that point that it has its own limitations. Some of them I'm aware, some of them I'm not.
Okay.
And I come with some grain of salt in every information I get from there. Some I don't want to check. I don't care whether this is true or not, and I leave it there. Some I actually take, okay, let me verify this somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's intriguing that what you say, because, if I think of looking at YouTube as a platform, I mean, how quickly it is you can identify, contributions that are AI generated. Really, and you just think, oh, really? Really? What is the purpose of wanting to initiate or to create a reality that is fundamentally false? Money would be the primary objective, to get people to click on the thing. But it's interesting to look at it through the lens of AI being a tool, which is fundamentally different to, how I have a relationship with AI, which is as an unexpressed and unknown extension of human consciousness. And it's really intriguing because it's kind of it sets up two different relationships that coexist, for sure.
Yeah. But
Absolutely.
it's not, oh, sorry, Paul.
Hey, Paul.
No, I was thinking about taking here a step as Martin is quietly taking notes. I'm sure he's going to do a great summary. But I was inspired by the conversation we had before starting this recording and the episode that we are live now for our dear viewers on how the system self-organizes and what's determinant is the container, right? So we are now talking about dialogue versus conversation, right? So, but this happens within a container, which is the organization. So it's within an organization how we can have both conversations and dialogue, right? So we already learned that dialogue is the kind of conversation where you're open to the unknown. Correct me, kid?
Yes, that's right.
And this is where I want to bring to your attention, and probably some of you here, dear guests, know about this case. Some of our viewers also heard about the case of the Morning Star Company.
Okay,
Morning Star Company is a tomato processing company that operates with no bosses, where everyone self-manages through peer-agreed commitments, the so-called colleague letters of understanding. Each staff member must write a colleague letter of understanding when he arrives at the company. And the decisions are made via advice rather than hierarchy. So my question to you, friends, is that AI will impact organizations in different containers, right? So if we are in Morningstar company, maybe AI will bring us to the best self as a company. Whereas if we are not in that kind of container, what would AI help us to do? How to cheat and get more attention from my boss?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's intriguing, isn't it? When you just as you were talking there, it reminded me of Valve. Have you ever heard of Valve, the organization Valve?
No.
Valve is an American. It's an organization that is dedicated to producing games. It's a gaming organization, and it became famous for having an HR policy that consisted of one page.
Yeah, I love it.
Which was, can you imagine going into an organization where the only instruction that you get is this? One, or there's two actually. One, go find someone as good as you to hire. And number two, find a chair and a desk, and there are wheels on the chair and the desk, so find something useful to do. That's it. There you go. And that is the basis of the organization. And I thought, how refreshing. And it does depend, doesn't it? Because when I think of organizations that have invested huge amounts of money, professional services firms are a classic, where they're all amplifying their AI solutions to things. Clients then buy it, and then they buy into the AI solution. But whatever the AI solution is, there are parameters that sit within corporate governance, which means it can't. They're already trying to put boundaries around these things, containers around AI, which limits just how far it can go based on legalistic frameworks and corporate governance. I don't know. I don't know where all of this ends. I just know I have a preference, but there we are.
Yeah, I think what we've just said there in the last 5 minutes, I think it loops us all the way back to why do organizations exist? Why do meetings take place in organizations? Why do we meet? And the answer to both of those questions is because we need to. Our DNA has us pre-programmed that we need, as humans, we have a social need. We're social animals. But so here's my concern, and I'm going to provocatively push back a little bit, Keith, on your understanding of AI as a tool versus Mila's. But my concern, I guess, is as we technologically progress further and further, faster and faster, are we accelerating away from our capacity to keep up as human beings? And that begs the question, Keith, which is a little bit of a pushback to your understanding or sense of AI, is that it's an unknown extension of human consciousness. And I'd flip that, and I'd push back and say AI has zero consciousness. AI has information. And you could even say it doesn't have information, it has data, because information is data interpreted through a contextual lens.
Sure.
So AI has access to data. And then if we take Mila's proposition or understanding of AI, it's a tool that I can interrogate that data, but I retain the interpretative authority to decide whether I exclude it, include it, accept it, reject it, or whatever.
Yeah.
But so organizationally, and if we look at meetings in organizations, here's my concern. Individuals interact with AI more than they interact with each other. And when they come to interact with each other, do they become so predisposed to interact as though we're interacting with AI? We no longer have the capacity to dialogue. We only have the capacity or the trained habit to engage as though the other person is an AI module or bot. And that's what I mean by as the acceleration of the interface with technology increases, is our underlying human system, our cognitive systems, are we actually capable of keeping up and staying connected with each other?
I find I take the challenge and I take the pushback, and I think it goes back to something that I said. I think it was on the last meeting. This I would see at this position. This is the great con, if you like, of AI, and the great con of AI is the, in my view, the irrational belief that we at some level should even attempt to keep up with AI. We never will. Speed wise, our brains just will not function in that way at that level of speed, and so our attempts to we would just set ourselves up for a state of perpetual anxiety. So that it becomes then, and this is where I loop back to Mila's point about the tool aspect, because the use of AI, or the way I interact with AI, is when I need AI, and AI provides me with, you're right, certain data, and depending how I use AI, depending how I engage with the questioning, because I engage in some really interesting dialogue with AI, and it does come back with some incredible things, is only when I need that to be. But the point, Martin, which I really support on, is the unintended consequence of diminishing our innate human capacity for reflection and interpretation. And I don't have any validity to that position, but it is a fear that I have seen a lot, and I see it so much in my grandchildren, particularly the older ones, where their ability to reflect on anything is dependent on whether or not they can access information via a phone. And I find that incredibly sad. Maybe we're bastions of a way of being in this world that will suddenly become redundant. I don't know.
Mila, in one of our previous conversations, you made a very specific point that Keith touched on there, which was it's foolish to try to keep up with AI or to think we can do better than AI because it's totally different to us. I remember that was a very specific point that you were quite strong on.
I think it's strong, but what I resonated with you, what you just said earlier, is that we have the human need to connect and to actually come to the shared understanding. That's something that we as humans have. And it made me think now, by listening to you guys here, also what is AI going to help us in it, or it's going to set us back? And it can do both. For in some cases, it actually might help to come to a shared understanding, because sometimes people cannot hear each other, and it's something that humans can help. Some other human, a third person, can help in a conversation to create the dialogue there. But in some cases, actually, AI might be easier if AI summarizes and translates what's being said to the other person. So sometimes might actually be helpful. On the other side, AI will also create potentially these fake or validating opinions without giving us opportunity to practice the dialogue. And I find that interesting, how that is going to impact the organizations.
Yeah.
It might actually bring, in some cases, more of opening if we use it right. And it will depend what, Keith, you asked earlier, what is the perspective, how I see AI and how you see, and how different those are. And I think we have just two examples. And there are many other people see it in many different ways.
Sure.
Interact with it. Some people might see it as a companion. Some people might see it as other forms. So I guess we are now at the stage of defining what approaches humans have towards AI, so that we can adjust to it and approach it differently.
I think that's really nice, and I love the point that you raised about the differences in the decisions that we make about what kind of relationship that we want to have with AI, and accepting the position that will be ever changing in the constellation of the fact that the evolution of AI and AGI is unknown to us. You know, there are lots of warnings, but it is unknown to us about how that will change. And there comes a choice in this, isn't there? There's one about, do we want to have a relationship with AI? I mean, that, not everybody utilizes AI even now. And that choice of the relationship will determine how it is that we will co-evolve in this space, accepting that there is Martin's point, which is an anthropological need for connection. Or do we evolve into some other form of relational connection that actually goes beyond the human, biological, psychological, spiritual connection that many of us long for, thirst for in this world?
Yeah, and let's be minded of the time, friends. It's 40 minutes past our conversation. We could be here for hours. Lots to take away. I'm sure Martin is preparing mental notes. Yes, but before we go, let me insist on dialogue versus conversation. I want our viewers to get a good, solid perception or being inspired about this difference between conversation and dialogue. Mila, over to you.
Dialogue is the ability to co-create through language shared meaning and multi-layers of meaning around any given subject without our attachment to being right or the outcome.
How about you, Mila?
I love the definition. I wouldn't touch the definition. I want to write it out so I can quote it.
But tell me about your experience in conversation and in dialogue, Mila.
Yeah, so we as humans tend to go more in a conversation unless we are intentional going to the dialogue. That's from the experience, at least. To every generalization, there are exceptions.
But
So
would the coach converse or dialogue with you?
Oh yeah. So the coach is even also it's more than a dialogue. It's on a little bit higher level because the dialogue is not about creating a shared understanding. The coach's opinion is not valued as much as opinions of the client. So the coach shares opinion only if there is the intention to help clients expand the perspective, give new ideas, inspire, or if there is intention for helping the client to see something differently. The attention is not more than just not being attached to the outcome. Also, if the coach is not attached to the outcome, if the intention is to come to a shared understanding, it's still a dialogue, a friendlier dialogue. Coaching conversation is higher than that. Coaches just reflect back clients' thoughts in some way.
So do you foster internal dialogue in your client?
Yes.
Pete, you would like to expand on this? You're also an executive coach from your interactions.
Yeah, I certainly, as Mila, as you were talking, I was thinking of two examples where dialogue has been used very specifically, and it's here. One was in technology, one was in aerospace. Both of them had the same outcome. They commissioned a series of dialogic sessions. The purpose of dialogic sessions in both of these contexts was to capture tacit knowledge. It was very, very specific. So what that meant was, how do you do what you do that is not captured on a job description? What is it makes you in the role that you have valuable, and your experience of delivering value to another person that cannot be captured in a job description? Those processes, that tacit knowledge of how value is generated and determined, was what these dialogic processes were used to capture. And it was fabulous, because what it described at the end of these processes were ways in which people showed up in their organizational world that nobody had any idea about.
Yeah. Where I came across dialogue was totally and utterly by accident, where I had facilitated a half-day strategy workshop with an executive team. And I had recorded it, and for academic purposes, I was analyzing the recording. And I was taking a relatively conventional approach, and I was looking at power dynamics and decision making and that kind of stuff. And a question arose: how do these people deal with conflict?
Mm-hmm.
And because the initial analysis of the conversation wasn't yielding any particularly useful or interesting insights, I applied that question to the half-day discourse between the participants. And it turned out there was no conflict. And yes, exactly. And that was the part that sent me looking to say, how did we have, and I was a participant, so I was analyzing my own participation as much as anybody else's, okay? So the question was, how did we have a half a day of an executive team talking in depth about strategy, and we didn't have conflict? And the conclusion was, because they engaged with each other spontaneously in a dialogic way.
Yeah.
So as I looked for markers of dialogue, how do I recognize dialogue? And I built a kind of a framework to say, this is how I would academically recognize it. And then I applied that as the lens through which I analyzed the discourse. Now, all of a sudden, the way in which the participants engaged with each other was dialogic in nature. Nobody was coming to the conversation saying, I'm right. Nobody was coming trying to push an outcome or an agenda. They, as a collective team, they were looking to explore. Now, they came up with outcomes. They came up with the action points. They came up with lists to do at the end of their half-day strategy session. But my conclusion academically, looking at what they were doing, was they were doing it in a dialogic way without ever mentioning the word dialogue. And I was the facilitator, and I didn't even know what dialogue was. But when I analyzed it back retrospectively, all of us were engaging in a dialogic way. So the big takeaway for me was we can consciously do that, but some groups do it unconsciously because that's the way they are set up as a group. And when I looked and reflected on this particular group and the way they formed and the way they evolved and the way they added new members to their group, which I was privileged to be able to see over about a 4 to 5 year period, it became very obvious why they engaged the way that they did. Wildly different personalities, wildly different backgrounds, but they had this way of dealing and interacting and engaging with each other that was dialogic in nature. So that might be a useful just notion that we don't have to deliberately do dialogue. It can and it does happen spontaneously. And when it does, it's fascinating to observe it, even if it's retrospectively, but it's fascinating to observe it as it's happening.
Fascinating.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I have to learn, instead of having a conversation to myself, I have to learn to dialogue with myself.
It's a thing, Paul. It absolutely, dialoguing with yourself actually is a thing. Because when you walk away at the end of that dialogue, you haven't made a conclusion, you haven't made a decision, you haven't come to an end, but you should be walking away better informed, better reconciled of the odd things that were in your head before you started. And at least you've come to a better understanding. That's what the dialogue should give you as an output, without the intent of having any specific output.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Be prepared to the unknown, dear viewers. Be prepared to the unknown and be open to the unexpected of this, having cultivated curiosity as a norm in your group, right? It's rather than certainties.
Big time. Big time.
Yes, and let's apologize for being here trying to converse with you because this supposedly you have to arrive to these conclusions by dialogue, not by someone telling you these conclusions. But anyway, I think we have to wrap up. Martin, have you got conclusions?
I'll try to take us through our conversation. Dialogue, I think, was more dialogic actually than conversational, as I'd reflect on it. We started with that idea, the nature of dialogue. We talked about dialogue versus conversation. Keith, you gave us 2 or 3 very eloquent definitions of dialogue. The essence of both of them, if I can characterize it, is no adherence or stringent holding on to the inputs, and most certainly we're not individually or collectively looking to try to reach any defined outcome. Primarily, individually and collectively, we enter dialogue with a view to building better understanding, individually and shared. So from that, we then took that into this space of relationship with AI and the concept of AI and its limitations. Each of you shared your ideas of what your relationship with AI is, whether it's that extension of human consciousness or as a clearly defined tool, Mila, that you talked about, which we can accept the outcome or reject the outcome, but we are the final arbiters of what comes out of AI, not AI being the final arbiter, if that makes sense. Keith, you gave us a specific example of the value gaming organization, which has 2 HR rules, which was kind of fascinating. But Morning Star, Paul, you gave us the idea of Morning Star, which equally fascinating, no bosses, no hierarchies. And in that context, we talked about container, the organization as a container, and the different organizations using AI might get very, very different outputs because they are inherently different organizations, which then brings us to the individual versus the collective use of AI. We actually then talked about our human need for connection, which we talked about at the very beginning, but this segued us into talking about the human need for connection. And a concern that I kind of inferred that all of us might share this concern. There is a potential for AI to drive us further apart rather than bring us together. But Mila, you did proposition that AI has the possibility to help us come closer. But I would suggest that's dependent on our willingness to dialogue with AI, not to accept AI as sacrosanct output. But that forces us all to, having interacted with AI, we still have to come back around the table. We still have to meet with each other. We still have to have their meeting, whatever it is, one-to-one, many-to-many, but we still have to share underlying our basic humanity. Because if we don't do that, what are we individually, or what are we as organizations? We're kind of back to being people before we're anything else, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's really awesome, Martin. And that concludes our conversation for today. I would say our dialogue for episode 58 on dialogue versus conversation. It was really, really a pleasure to be here with all of you, my dear guest speakers and my dear co-host. I hope that our viewers also enjoyed watching us and listening to us on our podcast also. So without further ado, I think we'll say goodbye for now, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Super. Keith, Mila, fantastic.
Bye-bye now.
You. Thanks a million for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks then. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mila.
Thanks,
Really
Mila.
enjoyed that.
Thank you
That
so
was
much.
My name is Paul Nunesdea. I'm a certified professional facilitator from the IAF, which stands for International Association of Facilitators. Since 2018, I've started a book series on architecting collaboration, and my latest book, in co-authorship with Martin Duffy and other renowned digital facilitators and guest co-authors, is titled Beyond Virtual Meetings. It's all about the importance of the digital tools that can extend and augment the power of you as a facilitator and a meeting host in virtual online meetings, but also on the hybrid meetings that are going to be so much needed in this post-pandemic era. Along with my co-author Martin Duffy and esteemed PhD colleague, we host Talk to Your Meeting Daughters, a series of hosted conversations with meeting experts that can advise you about how to transition to this new normal and take advantage of this incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make the organization of your meetings more sustainable and effective. Please stand by as the next show will start momentarily.